On the 18th of November, 1978, members of the Guyanese police force and the U.S. military ventured into the dense rainforest of northern Guyana to apprehend Jim Jones, the leader of an American cult that had settled in the region 4 years earlier. He and his followers had carved out a massive section of the forest and turned it into a compound called Jonestown. The only way to reach this town was to trek through dense vegetation, 100-foot-tall trees, and muddy ground. The true danger was beyond the trek, and Jim was likely already aware of the mission to apprehend him. A group of police and military personnel were welcomed by Asmo militia that was armed to the gills. However, when the group reached Jonestown, it was eerily quiet, and they came across a scene that could only be described as hell on earth. The town was empty except for the central pavilion, which was surrounded by the remains of hundreds of people, including many children. The total number of victims was calculated to be around 900, making it the largest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate incident up until that point in history. The reality was far more horrific than anyone could have imagined. Jim Jones's cult originally started as a church in the U.S., but as it became more popular, it garnered criticism from the media and the government for Jim's support of communism in places like Soviet Russia. In 1974, he moved deep into the rainforest of Guyana to escape the scrutiny, and a large number of his most loyal followers went with him. He presented this location as a self-sustained paradise where they could live a life of peace and serenity. In reality, life in Jonestown was anything but peaceful. Members were required to work 12 hours every day for 6 days a week, and there was nothing they could do to escape these torturous conditions. Jim had already reached an agreement with the Guyanese government to make getting a visa back to the U.S. almost impossible. The whole compound was surrounded by a fence, with armed guards patrolling outside to catch anyone trying to escape. In November of 1978, Congressmember Leo Ryan and 17 other people, including members of the media, visited Guyana to investigate Jonestown. They reached the headquarters on November 17th and began their operation, looking around and talking to people to learn the truth about Jonestown. Surprisingly, things looked just as carefree and jovial as Jim had portrayed in his promotional videos, though it later came out that Jim had actually run rehearsals on how to convince Leo's delegation that everyone was happy and in good spirits. Even then, the truth didn't stay hidden for long. That night, 2 members, Vernon and Monica, secretly passed an ominous note to the delegation that read, "Dear Congressman, Vernon Gosney and Monica Bagby, please help us get out of Jonestown." This prompted the delegation members to ask others if they wanted to leave as well, and 9 more cult members found the courage to come forward. The next morning, Leo's group took these members to the nearby Kaituma airstrip to return home, but just as they were boarding the planes, Jim's henchmen pulled up in a truck and opened fire, killing 4 people, including Congressmember Leo Ryan. Back at Jonestown, Jim gathered the members at the Central Pavilion and told them to drink the poison grape-flavored drink, which he called the only way to escape the American government. After the shooting at the airstrip, the U.S. military was on its way to Jonestown, but by the time they arrived, it was already too late. The sheer scale of the tragedy and the fact that many of the victims were forced into it turned it into the most haunting sight those soldiers or anyone has ever found in a forest. On April 4, 1922, a mechanic named Albert Hoffner visited the Gruber house located near a forest in Weidhofen, Germany. The family had hired him to repair their barn motor, but when he arrived, he noticed something strange. The cows and dogs were making a lot of noise in the barn, yet the rest of the house was silent. He tried knocking and calling out, but no one came to the door, assuming they weren't home. He waited in their yard for an hour before deciding to leave. But as he was about to leave, he noticed the door to the motor room was unlocked. So he repaired the motor anyway and came back for his payment later. After finishing the repairs, Albert wanted to inform one of the neighbors about his work, but the home was isolated. He knocked on the door of Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor, who found the empty house suspicious. Later that evening, he joined 2 of his neighbors to check things out. The house was just as empty as Albert had reported. One noticed that the door to the machine area was unlocked, and the 3 entered through this door. They discovered their remains of the Gruber family, including the 2 daughters, their parents, and their toddler grandson in his stroller with his skull crushed, as well as the family maid. Someone had murdered the entire Gruber family and left without getting caught. Later investigations concluded that the family was killed 4 days earlier on April 1st, but what made this already horrific crime even more chilling was that it was carried out over the course of several hours. The killer likely spent a long time in the house afterward, trying to hide the evidence by covering it with hay and blankets. The room with the maid even had clothes stuffed into its windowsill to make spotting her from outside more difficult. Most assumed this was a robbery gone wrong, but most valuables were still in the house, which complicated the case. Neighbors reported that the family had seen men staring at their home from the woods on multiple occasions. Their previous maid had quit months earlier, claiming the house was haunted, and someone had broken into the machine room a few days before the killings. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck family murders remain an unsolved mystery. In July of 2015, Mark Andre was marking trees in the dense Arcata Community Forest in California. He worked as Arcata's Environmental Services Director and was doing a routine inspection when something caught his attention. He noticed an unusual structure poking through the vegetation. He found a cabin, and it was surprisingly well constructed with a stable cinder block base, plastic sheets, and a lock on the front door. Mark notified the park rangers who staked out the cabin to see if the owner would return. They eventually broke the lock, but this only left them more confused. Inside, they found fresh water, a wood-burning stove, canned food, and even books stacked neatly. It looked more like a cramped studio apartment than a makeshift cabin. Mark and the rangers returned to demolish it, but they made an even more shocking discovery. The cabin had vanished without a trace, and in its place was the international symbol of squatter drawn in charcoal. In May of 2016, a hiker discovered a trail camera lying on the forest floor in Harlan, Kentucky, which didn't have any storage or battery. Assuming it was abandoned, he took it home to a friend to see if it could be fixed. As soon as the friend connected a battery to it, the camera exploded. The blast was powerful enough to blow off some of the man's fingers and injure his stomach, as the device had been rigged to explode the moment it received power. After being alerted to the incident, authorities searched the area where the camera was found and discovered another trail camera with similar modifications, but it didn't contain anything that could help identify the owner. While canvassing local neighborhoods, investigators caught a break when people reported hearing an explosion at a neighbor's house. That neighbor was 39-year-old Mark Sawaf, and when authorities searched his home, they found buckets filled with bomb-making materials and a note that read, "Broken camera for a broken soul." He was arrested on June 21, 2016. But before he could be officially charged, he grabbed an officer's gun and was accidentally shot and killed. Before his death, he helped the police find 12 more rigged cameras hidden throughout the Harlan forest. On November 10, 1985, a hunter was walking through the dense woods of Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Hidden beneath a pile of leaves and debris was a rusted 55-gallon metal drum. He discovered the chopped-up remains of 2 people inside. Investigations revealed the victims were a young woman and a young girl. Both had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head, then cut into pieces and stuffed into the barrel. Sadly, both bodies were too disfigured to identify. The case went cold until the year 2000, when a state trooper revisited the area, but instead, he came across another identical 55-gallon barrel just 150 yards from the first one. Inside were the remains of 2 more young girls, both between 1 and 4 years old. They had been killed in the same brutal fashion, blunt force trauma, then dismembered. The discovery confirmed that all 4 murders were the work of the same person. Eventually, DNA tests pointed to a man named Terry Peter Rasmussen. Unbeknownst to the authorities at the time, Rasmussen had already been arrested for the 2002 murder of his wife and was sentenced to life in prison, dying in 2010. Although the case is technically solved, many questions remain unanswered. In October of 1991, a man walking along a rural lane near Bolney, England, made a discovery that still haunts investigators. Hidden in the underground, Wrapped tightly in a piece of carpet was a human torso. The head and both hands were missing, and the arms had been cut cleanly just below the elbows to remove identifying tattoos. Forensic analysis determined the victim was a physically fit man between 30 and 45 years old, likely of southern German origin. The precision of the dismemberment suggested that the killer knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever they were, they had taken deliberate steps to erase this man's identity. The victim remains unidentified and the killer never caught.